I started making art seriously about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And before that...
Can you raise your voice a little bit because it's so noisy around here?
Okay. I started making art seriously about 3.5 years ago. But before that, I was spending a lot of time in art school. And I was doing a lot of experimentation. I used to be very much interested in a lot of objects and materials. I used to produce, I had most of my training in painting. So I used to do a lot of traditional painting. And then also I used to make sculptures.
Where did you study?
In Ghana, at the University of
Ghana.
In a city called Kumasi. So I was mostly working with traditional mediums, paint, plaster. So I used to make figures, but I used to work with plaster. And what I would do is that I would pour the plaster on a surface, mostly on the skin of models. I would take it off and then I would use that as the art form. So it was mostly very figurative. And then at a point, I was traveling from Ghana to one of the neighboring countries, and I was stuck at the border for a really long time. It was really important, and I saw all these trucks that were carrying food mostly across the border. And it was very easy, but at that moment, something dawned on me about what this material represented.
Utah.
The jute sack and what it represented. It was more or less like something, a vessel that could take the shape of anything and move into one space or the other. So I thought it was very interesting. One, from a poetic sense, and then secondly also looking at the aesthetics of it and then the politics associated with the material. So when I came back to Ghana, I started using this material as one of the objects I was using on the body. But later on, I realized that at a higher level, when the material is used over and over again, and then later on it is used to transport charcoal, the material seems to have collapsed at that point, because once you put charcoal into it and it stains the material, you can no longer put food into it. So it became really interesting for me. So that's when I actually realized that the tension between an object and also what it contains is something that is really important to me. So I began using this idea of crisis as a medium of production. So what I actually do in my process as an artist is that I mostly buy new materials. So all these materials that you see, the tendency is that because sometimes you're African and you use materials that seem to have a certain sense of poverty about it, people think it's found material, but it's not found. Because you have to negotiate for them. You have to buy new materials and then you have to give it to those who own these old materials that have collapsed and then take the old ones. So every object that you see in my work represents a certain form of exchange. So this exchange became really
poverty
important.
And dwelling.
Yeah, this exchange became really important in terms of looking at how you can create a dialogue between different spaces. And the crisis of architecture also, like in a postmodern system, was something that I was also very much interested in. In as much as I was interested in making art, I was also interested in the experience of it. How do the audience, which I tend to think are people in the city and other spaces, are somehow inscribed in the language of the material? Because when we trade in things, or when one thing moves from one place to the other, we are normally interested in the commodity, but we are not really interested in the actual process of how the system of production